Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of the Where in the World podcast on YouTube, and currently not on whereintheworldismatt.com. My name is Matt. I'm your host, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, I say that this podcast is not on whereintheworldismatt.com currently because I'm actually doing quite a few updates to the website. So currently, if you're trying to search the website, if you want to see the pictures, the resource guides and stuff, it's not going to be there right now because again, I'm trying to do a lot of upgrades and stuff to make it a bit more of a better experience for the people who are trying to access that content. So definitely stick with me, and hopefully by the end of this month, I will have all of that taken care of and it will be up and running again. But until then, you can definitely listen to the YouTube or you can listen to the podcast on YouTube. So definitely check it out. So it's been a month already again, and it seems so crazy. This is my 7th episode now, and I'm really starting to feel like I'm getting the hang of it. I feel like your guys' feedback on the things that you've been suggesting and all that has definitely helped me to grow, and I'm really enjoying doing this. So I hope that this experience has been meaningful to you guys as well, because it definitely has for me. And I also have to say today has been an absolutely incredible day weather-wise here in Armenia, in Vardanic. It is so nice. It's about mid-80s today. The sun is shining, and the lake, you wouldn't believe it, but it is like this super crazy turquoise blue right now. Very picturesque and almost unreal how pretty it looks. So like it's just such a nice day. And if you guys can't tell, I have, I'm very excited. I'm in good spirits. So hopefully that will reflect in what we're about to talk about today. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is something every single person loves, something every single person does every day of their life, and we literally cannot live without it. So I have a guest speaker today. His name is Michael Chen. He is a former Peace Corps volunteer here in Armenia, and he's going to talk to us about food. Food, like something that's so simple but has such a huge impact on different cultures. And we're going to talk about why does food have an impact on culture, and what does it mean, and what do those experiences translate to. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things in regards to food during this podcast. But before we get to that interview, I just want to kind of give you guys the normal update, what's been going on with me. July was a pretty relaxed month, actually. It was really nice. If you remember in June, I had the backpacking border-to-border experience for pretty much that entire month. And then July came, and on the 6th, it was actually my birthday right at the beginning of the month. So thank you so much. Shout out to my mother. She paid for me to have 2 nights at this really nice new resort in Yerevan, the capital here in Armenia. I was able to spend 2 days on my own, just kind of get away from everything, take a mini me vacation within the country, and just, take time to myself. Like I said, it was nice. I got to play basketball, something I haven't been able to really do much, but I really enjoy. And then I also got to sit around a pool, and you never see pools here. So I was definitely hanging out, tanning, swimming. I mean, it was honestly so great just to have that time. So shout out to my lovely mother in Iowa for helping me out to do that. And then after that, I actually got to meet up with a couple of my friends from Peace Corps here, and they threw a dad-themed party for me. And it was seriously so fun, and it's funny to me because I've kind of adopted this this whole persona of myself that I am like this Peace Corps dad because of the way that I dress, the way that I like to talk, the way that people kind of come to me and talk about things, and I try to see it with see both sides to the story. So they always call me dad, which I think is so funny. And so they threw an entire themed party for me. There's about 8 of them there. They were all dressed kind of like a tacky tourist dad, where you have like the funny hats or a fedora or something, the nice shirt, either floral pattern or just like striped, and then tucked into the jean shorts or whatever, followed by just the, like the classic, like I've got my sandals and my socks on. And it's funny because that is a look that I would honestly never wear. But, I really appreciated all of the thought and effort that went into that party. So shout out to those guys for definitely putting that together and making it happen, because it was a really fun night. So I had my birthday, and then a couple weeks ago, I had a safety security meeting for Peace Corps, something that we're required to do every year. Just, in case there of an emergency, we're kind of prepared for what we would do and how we would go about it. But because of that, I got to go to Lake Savan and hang out in this community called Gavar, about 40 minutes away from where I'm at here in Armenia. And my buddy, Trevor, who I interviewed on a previous episode, you can check that one out. It was episode 3, I believe. And so I got to hang out with Trevor for a couple days. And the first day that I was there, he had these people who were couch surfing. And if you don't know what couch surfing is, it's this really cool online community source where it kind of like, the Airbnb booking type of themes, but these people are signing up, offering up their homes if they have the available space to travelers, and saying, hey, if you're passing through, you need a place to stay, you're always welcome to crash on my couch or whatever. That's why it's called Couch Surfer. And so he's hosted a lot of people during our time here in country, and it's given him the opportunity to meet some really unique and cool people. And so this most recent time, there was these 2 guys who were from this program called Global Degree Academy. And so these guys, believe it or not, had been traveling now for the last 5 years. 5 years they've been traveling, not going home, not taking a break, and they're on a mission to see every single country in the world. And it was just like mind-blowing to me. Honestly, I couldn't fathom the idea of, like, 1, traveling for that long, and 2, like, actually the realistic ability to, like, go and see every single country in the world. It's so incredible to me. So again, if you want to check out Couchsurfing, you can go to couchsurfing.com, get signed up, and then you can either participate or host people. And it's just a really cool way to meet people. And then also with this Global Degree Academy, you can go to globaldegreeacademy.com, kind of research what that program is about. I'll give you a little bit of a synopsis of what they do. So it is an online university degree where they have over 75,000 courses, credited and non-accredited, that you can choose from in order to complete your studies and transfer those credits to your home university. And then there is, along with it, discount opportunities on various experiences and accommodations from all the countries. And you get that opportunity, just like these guys who were from the couch surfing, to travel to over 190 countries over a course of 5 years. And it's such a cool program, something I never really knew about. But I was happy to meet these guys, because it's always cool to learn about more of these programs, especially for students, because as I did in university and found, university truly is the easiest time of your life to go and study. So why, or not to study, to go and travel. So why wouldn't you take advantage of that, to do both the studying and the traveling at the same time? So, I would definitely check it out, and I'll throw up the links to those 2 resources into the video description. So make sure to definitely check that out. So without further ado, we will get underway with my interview with Michael Chen, former Peace Corps volunteer. I am so excited for you guys to hear about this. And like I say it every time, but so true this time. When you kick back and relax and you're listening to this interview, definitely have a snack with you or something, or grab that coffee, cup of tea, juice, whatever, because you are going to be so hungry after listening to this. So I'll see you guys on the other side, and thank you so much for joining me once again for another Where in the World podcast.
All right, so today I'm joined by a Peace Corps volunteer who actually just finished up his service here in Armenia. Uh, Michael is going to talk with us today a little bit about food. Food is a really interesting topic when it comes to culture. Anywhere that you go, anywhere that you travel, food definitely plays a huge role in that experience that you're having in these foreign places. So I'm really excited to talk about, or to dive into more about this topic and this idea with him because he's definitely a guy who loves to eat. Not that he's big. He's got a crazy metabolism like I do, so he stays pretty skinny, but he's going to talk about some really interesting experiences in regards to food and the culture behind it in various places that he's been. But before we get to talking about that, let's learn a little bit more about him. So, as I said, I'm joined by Michael, and let's hear a little bit about where you're from, what did you study, and why did you choose to come to Peace Corps Armenia?
My name is Michael Chen. I'm a PCV that just finished my service here in Armenia. I was actually born in China. I moved to the United States when I was 2 years old, when my parents came over to study, to do their graduate education. And I grew up in the States, briefly returning back to China when I was 6 and 7. So I went to elementary school there for a while. I decided to do Peace Corps, partially because I felt that I was in kind of a rut professionally, and my job before Peace Corps wasn't really challenging me, and I felt that if I didn't make a change at that time, then I probably wouldn't make a change for a long time. So that was kind of the impetus for why I chose Peace Corps. I studied English and marketing at the University of Minnesota. Though those degrees aren't specifically geared towards Peace Corps, they do give you a lot of skills in taking in information and being able to understand it, as well as communicating with people. So I do think those degrees are valuable, but they don't necessarily apply to what I was doing in Peace Corps. So that's a little bit about myself.
That's cool. So you've done a little bit of traveling in the past. So could you just name off maybe a few places that you've been to, what you've thought of those places? Maybe how do they compare between like your time living in China and your time in the U.S.? So let's just hear about a couple of the places that you've been fortunate enough to have traveled in the past.
For sure. I actually didn't start traveling until much later in my life. I didn't have much interest for it, to be honest. I grew up in the Midwest. I went to school in Minnesota. My parents still live in a small town in Illinois, and we occasionally did family vacations, but I was never a big fan of them. I really started enjoying traveling more, I would say, when I did my study abroad in South Africa, and I did that in my junior year of university. I was there with a program called Tracing the Footsteps of Social Change. So what we did was we looked at apartheid, how that affected blacks and whites in South Africa, and what the history of that was, but also what like the impacts of it are still today in South Africa. So it was a really cool experience. I got to meet some really interesting people. But after that, Peace Corps really has allowed me to do a lot more traveling. I'd say I've traveled more in my 2 years in Peace Corps than I have in my entire life, essentially. I was able to go to the Czech Republic for a little bit. I just got back from Istanbul and Georgia. During that time, I also went to Southeast Asia for a while, not only to visit my grandparents in China, but also to travel to Hong Kong, as well as Vietnam and Singapore. And I think that's seeing those places and being able to travel to those places really got me more interested, not only in eating, because I love eating. I think that's a great thing, but also like thinking about food in a more critical way. So, yeah.
So aside from your love for food, what are maybe a couple hobbies that you have or things that you've picked up during Peace Corps, just things that kind of keep your life interesting, I guess.
Before Peace Corps, I really liked to write. I wrote short poems. I liked writing short stories. Although I did a lot more of starting short stories and actually finishing a lot of short stories. But writing was a big part of my life. I played the violin for 8 years. That was interesting at one point in my life. Not so much anymore, as it goes with a lot of hobbies. I wouldn't say I picked up new hobbies in Peace Corps. I think I lost hobbies. Things that I used to find interesting, I just didn't find interesting in Peace Corps anymore. And one of those things was reading, which is kind of surprising for me because I really thought I would take a lot of time and read. But it seems like it's the same case with a lot of volunteers when you're abroad and you're doing really mentally exhausting things, just like communicating in a foreign language and trying to work in a foreign language. I just didn't have interest in reading after I got home from school. So that was, I think, one of the things I lost. I used to play a lot of basketball and a lot of tennis, and I haven't been able to do that here, which is kind of a bummer. Things I would say I picked up. I started enjoying talking with people a little bit more, which is probably why I'm doing this podcast. I think before it was kind of a hassle, and I was always kind of awkward with conversation, but now it's become something that I look forward to, and meeting new people is not so much just meeting new people, but learning about new people. So I think that's probably, if you can call it a hobby, that's something that I picked up here for sure.
So like you said that you've lost, I don't know, maybe interest in some of the hobbies that you used to have that you now no longer do during the 2 years that you spent in Armenia. But you think part of that reason was because of picking up more of an interest in talking with people. You've kind of dedicated more time to getting to know people. And then also just the fact that, like you said, you didn't travel necessarily a ton before Peace Corps, and now you've been able to fill time in traveling, not even outside of the country, but I'm assuming a lot in the country as well. Do you think that just like that new interest in traveling, talking with people has kind of filled the void of some of the previous hobbies that you used to do?
I would say that's accurate. I'm an only child, so I always blame a lot of things on being an only child. But I think when you're an only child, you do a lot more like introspection. You think about thinking a lot more. And I have this really bad habit of replaying like moments in my life over and over again, to an extreme. And I think when you're an only child, you kind of have to do that because you work through a lot of your own issues. So I never learned how to talk to people, despite my parents like trying to encourage me, until I actually was forced to talk to a lot of people. And I think Peace Corps and a lot of other things, but especially in Peace Corps, because sometimes you spend a couple weeks at site not using English and really not getting to know people on a deeper level, at least for me. And you have this like really strong desire to come and meet up with people maybe that you wouldn't even call friends back in the States. And you just want to use English and you want to talk to them and kind of get into their heads. So I definitely think that Peace Corps has made me become a little bit more outward instead of inward. And just because due to the nature of what Peace Corps is, we kind of lean on each other for support. So I think that has definitely taken up a lot more of my not only time but mental energy, and it's probably why that I enjoy traveling a little bit more and learning about other cultures. So yeah, I'd say you're right about that.
And we can't fail to mention that one of these hobbies obviously is your passion for eating foods. I mean, that especially when you're traveling, because you make such a priority out of that whenever you're traveling. So can you kind of give me and the listeners a little bit of like kind of detail about like why you enjoy food so much, and how did you find out that you enjoy it beyond just the meal itself, like the actual like just consuming food for that purpose?
So I fucking love food. I think it's one of not only the action of eating food. Growing up, that's been a big thrill of mine. And there's probably some dependencies on it, and using food as a way of coping with things. So those are all negative things. But I think I'm not really sure how I developed a love for food. I think maybe genetically I was more predetermined to love food than others. But I remember as a child, I would go to like dinner and I would eat really quickly with my parents because I didn't really want to talk to my parents when I'm eating. So I would eat really quickly, and then my parents would like excuse me, and then I would sneak downstairs again and then take the food out of the fridge and then have like a second dinner upstairs in bed by myself. So I have this really bad habit. I like to eat in bed, and I like to be alone when I do it. Like I'm shamefully doing something disgusting in my own in my cave. So and that habit has persisted. Unfortunately, I'm not really proud of that habit. But I think like food in general, if we don't even get into the cultural side, is one of those things that was always there for me. I could always look forward to food. I would get hungry and I get to eat again. There's very few things in life, I think, that you can depend on more than like the satisfaction of filling hunger, even like masturbation or sex, right? Like sometimes you can't get it, or, you're not in the mood. And like food doesn't discriminate if you're ugly. Food doesn't discriminate what race you are or what mood you're in. It's always there for you. And food's always been there for me. So that's why I'm advocating for food on this podcast. Culturally, I think traveling and food is probably the biggest draw for traveling for me. I like to learn about other cultures, and I think food is really just one of the easiest ways to do it, and it's typically a really authentic way to do it. If I'm traveling, I don't necessarily plan my trip around like specific places I want to go, but I will like look at lists of foods that like I should try, and I try to try them in the settings that they're usually eaten at by the place I'm going to. So I try to avoid like the really touristy places, and I think that's kind of just common knowledge for when you're traveling for food. But I think it's a great way to look into other people's lives, and so many cultures, they have so many cultural components that surround the idea of eating, especially eating with a family. And it's just a great way to look into that and get a little insight into that.
So when you're like picking places that you want to go to travel to see, you touched on it a little bit, but like beyond like researching what food is in certain countries, do you ever like specifically look to travel places because of the food? So like you like find out about this dish, but you find out that like this dish is native somewhere in Thailand. Are you then instantly interested to go to Thailand to like try that type of food, or like does it play a huge role on like your final decision on where you're going to go?
Yeah, I would say it definitely does. So I went to Vietnam last Christmas. I'm sorry, two Christmases ago. And the reason for going there, I would say, is mainly the food. And I spend like the times when I'm not eating, I spend that time thinking about eating, or watching people eat, or watching people talk about food and thinking about eating. And I would say that's probably a good 50% of my day. And with like Netflix and the strong growth in YouTubers who travel to destinations and eat foods, and shows like Ugly Delicious, or there's this new show called Chef or something like that, and there's just a ton of shows on food, and they all come at it from different angles, and I really think that's really cool. So it's definitely a big draw for me when I think of traveling. And not all places I think have great food. But for me, like it's pretty high up there when I think about where I want to go. It might not be like the biggest thing, but for sure, if I'm on vacation, I need a break. I need good food. So,
When it comes to like the preparation of food, are you a fan of making your own meals, or do you have a bet like because that's a whole different like aspect of food is like the actual preparation opposed to like the consumption of it. So do you gain enjoyment or like to cook, or do you enjoy it more when you're able to like maybe go out to like that hole in the wall mom and pop restaurant that like it's like super authentic food and it's being made by the locals? Do you enjoy one or the other more?
so I don't think I have a natural inclination towards cooking. I do think it's really valuable, and I do enjoy doing it. And I force myself to do it because I think it gives you a greater appreciation into food. Food exists because people make that food, and I think that's like something that is really really important. But we tend to forget. We go to a restaurant and we order something, and it shows up. We pay a little bit of money, and we don't think about the actual process of what it takes for that food to get there. Like chefs going out and picking out ingredients, chefs putting together menus, chefs putting together different dishes, and a lot of that is kind of forgotten when we go out. So that's something that's really important to me. And the more I can force myself to think about that while I'm eating, I think the more I enjoy food. And the more I feel comfortable enjoying food, because I think if you just love to eat and you don't think about this process, I think that's a big loss on your end. I like to cook. I'm not particularly good at it, but I like to try new things. So how-to videos on YouTube are a big hit with me. Although I end up watching the videos and not cooking. But when I do cook, I tend to have a ton of fun. My only thing with it is like I would get really hyped up to cook a meal, and I would go out and buy the ingredients, and I'd watch the YouTube video a couple of times, and I'd do it, and I would spend like 2 hours cooking, whether it's for myself, a lot of times it's for myself, or for a friend, and then we would eat it, or I would eat it, and that process it's quick. I'm a quick eater, so that's like 5-10 minutes, and the food is gone, and then you have cleanup after that. And in my mind, I'm always thinking like, man, this is it's not really efficient on my end. It would be a lot easier for me just to go out and get something. Yeah, but I think that just comes with practice, and with practice you'll get better at cooking, and you'll not waste as much stuff and time. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. But to answer your question, yeah, I like cooking, but I don't love it. How's that?
Yeah. It's just funny because it can be a blessing and a curse, because you talk about like it is fun to like see the process. When I've done a handful of times when I've traveled, like in Vietnam, I did like a food tour where we actually went to like this organic garden that had a little like tea house style restaurant on it. And so like you went there, you picked your own like vegetables, and then they taught you how to make like completely organic spring rolls. And that was such a cool process, just to like you said, you get to see where the food's coming from. You get to do the prep, like see how it's done. And then the best part is obviously if you've done it well, you get to eat it. But like here in Armenia, it's funny because like a lot of the restaurant styles are kind of open kitchen concept where you can see how they're making all of the food. And sometimes that's cool, sometimes it isn't, because then that's when you get to see the chef who is smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and scratching his butt and then never washing his hands. He's also going elbow deep into the meat that's making your kebab. And so when you get to see that, it's not as exciting for the food process, but at the same time, you also get to see the food made. So based on some of the places you've lived, the traveling you've done, Armenia, China, US, South Africa, would you mind maybe sharing like 2 or 3 like interesting different stories that you've experienced via like food culture in these different places? So like what was that experience? What was the food? What did it make you feel? Just anything and everything about like different experiences you've had while eating food.
Yeah. So I was actually, before this conversation, I was thinking back about what I would want to share. And the more I thought about what stuck out in my mind, the more I realized that it wasn't so much the traveling to new places that gave me these really cool food moments, but I think much more of the cultural things that surrounded the moments, the food moments. So, and a lot of these, so two of these are just with my family, and yeah, so I'll start with those. The first one is eating hot pot in China. So I was born in China. I moved to the U.S. when I was 2. I moved back to China for a couple years, and after that, even though I lived in the U.S., I continued to visit China relatively frequently. My grandparents both lived there. Most of my family's relatives lived there, so there's always reason to visit. And every time we visit, we would have hot pot, and essentially what that is they have a big pot. I remember it as this with this red metal cover and this metallic bottom. It kind of looks like a giant wok, and you boil water or stock. It doesn't have to be water. Typically they put some spices and things in there, very simple things though. And then you just dump raw things in there, and you basically cook it in this boiling water, and you take it out and you dip it in this different types of sauces. So, for example, we would put like strips of lamb or strips of beef. We do tofu usually, sometimes fish balls, mushrooms. At the end, we'd put a bunch of vegetables in there. So I would say, like, I always remembered eating this growing up, and typically it always has happy memories. I think not because the food itself was so innovative or delicious or had reached a pinnacle for that specific food, but because of kind of the rituals that surround it. We would always eat that with a big family. It would always be a really fun time. Sometimes we would eat it while there's like certain holidays, we would eat it. Usually it's something that brings people together. So that's one event that, or one food experience that I really remember in. Definitely something that I hope to pass on to my kids, if I have kids, or maybe if I don't have kids, roommates or other friends. We'll see. Man, that was really depressing thinking of not having kids. Anyway, I think another from food to children. Another thing that I remember, this is also in America. So, we used to live in Oregon, and we used to live maybe an hour and a half away from the beach. And, we would occasionally go to this small port city called Lincoln City, and we would crab for Dungeness crabs there. And I would say this is probably one of like the best memories I have of my childhood, because it brought my grandpa, who was living at the time in America, but he didn't speak any English at all, so he only spoke Chinese. And typically, he didn't go out of the house a lot. He couldn't really communicate with people a lot, but so he wasn't really happy in America. But like my grandpa would love going crabbing because it was just something he couldn't do in China. So we would have these baits where we put raw fish heads or chicken legs, and you grab a spot by the pier, you chuck the cage down, you wait maybe 15 minutes, and then you pull it up, and I remember seeing like tons of crabs there. So we would do that for like 4 or 5 hours, and then we would always rent like a beach house with a couple of other families and steam the crabs. And we wouldn't do anything with the crab meat. We would just basically dip it in this vinegar sauce. It was like vinegar and maybe a little bit of spices, but really, really simple. And those memories of going to Lincoln City to crab stand out in my mind as one of the food experiences, because once again, it brought people together. It was an experience, and all the kids loved it. All the adults loved it. So those two are kind of the two cultural things I remember. Another food experience that I think is really, really unique is eating. Eating in general in Vietnam, I think is really, really cool, but specifically eating pho, which is a rice noodle dish with beef, cooked with beef bones. The dish itself is really, really fragrant. So how you're supposed to eat it is you get it, and before you put any kind of hot sauce or any kind of things in there, you take a drink of the soup, and you should even though it's clear, you should really get a very rich flavor of beef. And people just eat this on the street. Like in America, when I go eat pho, like I go to a restaurant, it's like an affair. Like we would drive from Salem, Oregon to Portland, Oregon to go to a pho place, and it would be like a whole day affair. Like we would do that, and then we do some shopping before coming back. But in Vietnam, it's something they eat in the mornings. It takes them like 3 or 4 minutes to eat, and then they pay and leave. And I think that's one thing that's really unique about Vietnam is the street food there is not just for like tourists. It's like the locals, they eat a ton of street food too. Like most of the time you see locals eating street food. And I think that experience of sitting outside, it's hot, the streets are not particularly clean. You're on these red plastic benches with tables that are meant for toddlers. And you pick something, and within 30 seconds, it's out. And you eat it, and you pay, and you leave. And that whole process can be done within 5 minutes. And I think that is such a cool thing about Vietnamese food that if you don't go to Vietnam, you'll never experience. It's not that you're eating it wrong in America or other countries. It's just that it's different. Eating pho in America and eating pho in Vietnam, the foods might taste similar, but like the experiences you get from that are really different. And that's why I think traveling and eating is important, to experience the food in its natural setting. Sorry, that was really long-winded again.
You touched on it a little bit, but I totally agree with you in the fact that like I think like especially like Southeast Asia, some of those countries just have such a unique food culture. Like you said, it's done a lot in public, on the streets type of thing. And also, you also touched on this. It's not always overcomplicated. So like when I was traveling throughout that part of the world and had a couple of days in China, I actually went to this little tiny village up in the mountains that was really well known for its tea. And usually I don't do a ton of research before going places, so I didn't know anything outside of that. But they had a really, again, like you were talking about, and I've seen it in a lot of other countries as well throughout that part of the world, is the fact that like the food vendor culture is very real, and the people take part in that who are from there. But I remember from that experience, one of my favorite memories was actually this guy who made ramen on the street, and he did it on this mobile cart. So he just kind of took it wherever. And it kind of seemed like if you watched him a little bit, he would hit people frequently that he probably knew who get the ramen from him. But like ramen in the States is such like a commercialized and simple item where you just buy the little pack and you either cook it in the microwave or something. And the way he did it was he would do it on this boiling pot on his cart. And then he had like, if you have ever gone to like a bar that has like chicken strip, like boxes or whatever, like, or like the little like plastic bowls that they put the like chicken strips, fries in, he had like a ton of those, but he had his own twist to the ramen. So he had like all of the, like probably 30 different options of different like vegetables, fruits, meats, seafood, just like all laid out in these different ones. And he just charged you a flat rate, and then you just kind of pick and choose what you want. So like I remember, I don't even know half the stuff I put in it, but at the end of it, like at some point I must have picked some really like hardcore spices, because this ramen was like so hot that I almost couldn't eat it. I was like literally like drooling from how hot it was. My mouth was on fire. I had mucus coming out of my nose, but it was such a cool experience, because it was like you said, like they take like the simple things and just add their own unique twist. So that was a really cool experience that I had in China. How much do you think your like little bit of upbringing in China and the family culture that is just very common, where it's like very family oriented in those type of countries, how much of an impact do you think that setting had on your like love for food, and maybe more like the culture surrounding food opposed to just the food itself?
Yeah, I love Chinese food. I didn't grow up loving Chinese food. When I was in America, like my parents would always cook Chinese food for me, and I'd be like, "This is shit." Like, I want to eat fries. Like, instead of this finely prepared meat with vegetables, I want fried potatoes. And like my parents like couldn't understand me, and like now I probably can't understand me either. But I love eating Chinese food. I think spending those 2 years in China really had an impact on how I saw like eating and food, because in China there is a lot of street food available, and a lot of times we wouldn't do a lot of cooking. Like we wouldn't necessarily go out to like fancy restaurants and eat, but a lot of times we would go out and just get some like baozi, which is like are kind of like dumplings, but they're breaded and they have meat inside, either pork or chicken or something else. Or we would go out and get something simple like that. So growing up in that culture, I really developed a passion for different types of food. And if you go to China, there is a wide range of foods. Yeah, sometimes city to city they have different specialties. But you know what? There's also, I think, negatives too. Like, not like I don't think we have to go to like every culture and say like all their food practices are great. So in China, what my grandpa would do, I mean, he grew up in a different time, but we would eat leftovers for like weeks at a time. And growing up, like that was just something we did. And it was fine until we realized that letting the food sit out non-refrigerated is not a good thing. And that habit was it's been 20 years or so. And my grandpa still has difficulty throwing away food. And like that's one of the things where it's like that's part of the food culture in China. People that grew up during that period, and you guys can look into that period, it was unstable and like food was scarce and people were starving. So you treated food as like an essential commodity, and that had effects on how it was prepared, what type of foods became popular, and also just the behaviors that surrounded food. So that's one of the things that I also picked up. I rarely waste food. Even if it's not good, even if it makes me kind of feel like shit, I'll still eat the food. I won't throw it away. And I think that's just one of the things that I picked up. But I guess to summarize that, I think in China people say there's a huge like family dinner aspect. But I don't think that's always the case. With my family, like we would have family dinners, but on regular days when people were working, we would eat like random things. You know, maybe my grandpa would cook something and put it on the table and we'd all kind of eat at different times. So really there's no like you can kind of generalize, but it doesn't mean that all families are going to be the same. So that was kind of the family I grew up in. And I really appreciate when I go to new places, I can sit down with people and eat with them and participate in that ritual. When I'm eating by myself, or when I'm in America, I actually prefer to eat by myself in my room, in my hole with the door locked. But like when I travel and try and experience new cultures and food, I try to be a part of that.
Well, cool. I'm pretty hungry after talking about all this food now, so we're gonna have to talk about where we're gonna go to eat after this. Because I mean, it's almost supper time, so yeah. It's about time to get some good food. So you've just finished up your 2-year service with Peace Corps. We've talked about all this different kind of food and everything that kind of surrounds it and why you like it. But before we head out and grab some awesome food somewhere, can you just kind of tell us what do the next couple months maybe of your life look like? What do you think about doing once you head back to the States? Actually, you're going tomorrow. You're leaving tomorrow. So what's the next stage looking like for you?
So I'm not actually heading directly back to the States. I'm going to travel a little bit in Southeast Asia. Tomorrow I'm actually heading out to Indonesia, which is known not only for its beaches, orangutans, but food and people. So I'm excited to experience the food there. After that, who knows? You know, at some point I'll have to find a job and I'll have to make my way back to Springfield, Illinois. which is a pretty cool place, but not somewhere that I want to stay forever. But I miss the food there, and we have some pretty unique dishes. So yeah, the next few months I'm going to be traveling. We'll see where it takes me. I don't think I can ever have a career surrounding food. I think I don't have the same palate as a food critic. I just love food too much. So I would not be able to distinguish between good food and great food, or even mediocre food and good food. So I'll have to figure out something else, but that's okay,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Sit down, talk about food with us. I definitely enjoyed it, but like I said, I'm ready to grab some food. But thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you so much to Michael for taking the time to sit down with me right before he headed out on his big travel, right after finishing his Peace Corps service. It was so great having that opportunity to talk with him about food. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to him talk about food. It was seriously so much fun to just like sit down and record it. So I had a blast even just listening through it again. It was so fun. But now, after having listened to it, I'm seriously so hungry. I don't know about you guys. I'm going to be ready to go and grab something to eat because, talking about all these great different dishes and cuisine has my stomach a little rumbly. So I'm definitely going to be doing that pretty soon after this. But before I say goodbye to you guys, I have, as normal, my question for y'all. So something to keep those conversations going, keep us engaged, and I love hearing from you guys every single time. So the question for this month, based on what we just talked about, is what is one of your favorite food dishes and why? So like what's that food dish that, if you, let's say you're on death row, or maybe not death row, let's say you're leaving home on an awesome trip and you're not going to have your absolute favorite dish until you return home, and that's the last thing you want to eat before stepping on that long plane ride or whatever your means of transportation is. What is that dish and why do you love it so much? Does it have to do with the actual preparation, the food that's in it? Is there a culture surrounding the way that you eat it? And then, when you're thinking about it, where does it originate from? So for example, mine's changing all the time because there's always things, like I try new things, and then for quite a while, that new thing will be like, oh my gosh, I have to have it. But the one thing that's just consistently like I absolutely love, can't live without it, is burritos. Oh guys, I love me some just like fresh beef burritos with, like sweet peppers in it, onion, some like really spicy sauce or jalapenos, like, just like completely loaded up, roll it. Something that's like the size of your forearm. Like, oh, I love burritos, guys. And if you can't tell the way I'm describing it, I'm so hungry. Maybe a little cheese sauce over top of it, just so it's a little bit messy. You have to eat it with a fork then, like, oh. But so that's my thing, and that originates from the Hispanic culture, which I'm so thankful for that we have so much of in the States, because that means that we also have part of their culture is their food, and I absolutely love Mexican food. It's absolutely my number one favorite cuisine to have, hands down. So again, what is your favorite food dish and why? And then where does it originate from? So I'm going to look forward to hearing from those, but I'm going to have to put you guys on pause and read them later because I'm going to have to go eat now because I'm so hungry. But again, thank you so much, y'all, for taking the time out of your day to sit down, listen to another one of my podcasts. And if you haven't had the opportunity to listen to all of them, you can always go onto my channel, Where in the World is Matt, on YouTube. I have all of them uploaded on there. And then, like I said, pretty soon, whereintheworldismatt.com will be back up and running again. New interface. It'll be so much cleaner to look at, easier to find stuff. So I'm really excited to have that all taken care of. But I hope you guys have an amazing August. And until then, just have a great time. Go out, travel, eat some great food, and I will see you guys then.